Hi, my name is Franz Niederholzer. I'm a farm advisor, a county extension educator with the University of California Cooperative Extension in the southern Sacramento Valley. I work with tree crop growers, mostly prune and almond growers, in the region. I'm also the chair of the University of California's Extension Services Spray Application Technology Workgroup. I've been a pest control advisor working in tree crops in California, and I've also worked as the horticultural extension agent in Hood River County for Oregon State Extension Service. That was in the late 1990s. This short slideshow is a progress report on a project that I started last fall following conversations with Kim Blackburn and Bob McIntyre of Slimline Manufacturing. This is a slide from Dr. Ken Giles in the Ag and Biological Engineering Department at the University of California, Davis, showing the three equal goals of ag spraying: effective pest control, efficient application of that pest control material, and safe application for on and off target organisms. Achieving all three of these equally important goals is challenging. All spraying, for that matter, is challenging, and canopy spraying is really challenging. What practices and setups can you put in place to be effective, efficient, and safe? Kim and Bob at Slimline introduced me to an approach to tractor operating that could save tree crop growers money and time while getting good coverage and controlling pests and reducing spray drift, at least in the fall and dormant season when the canopy is thin or non-existent, or you've got a small canopy like trellised apple, something like that. This approach is described in the extension publication shown on the slide. I decided to give Gear Up and Throttle Down a try in the late fall in prune orchards, targeting plum aphids, a major pest in prune production. Aphids overwinter as eggs in prune orchards. No other aphid life forms are present in orchards roughly between December 1st and March 1st. Eggs hatch around bloom and populations rapidly build. Aphid eggs, shown here, tucked behind a dormant bud, are the size of a small grain of rice. 1 egg per orchard is the monitoring threshold developed for prune aphids. Excellent spray coverage is needed for good aphid control from pre-dormant, dormant, or delayed dormant treatments when aphid eggs are the targets. Fall and dormant sprays are the most common aphid control treatments in California prune orchards. Spray drift into surface waters and creeks, rivers, and ditches is receiving increasing attention from regulators. Pesticides used in dormant sprays in prune orchards have been found in local rivers that contain migratory salmon, among other important fish species. And those pesticides found in the rivers are detrimental, can harm or kill salmon or other important fish species. So pre-dormant spraying for aphid control in prunes is an excellent test case for Gear Up and Throttle Down, as excellent coverage is needed for control at the same time that drift must be minimized. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank all those folks who participated in this project. Dr. Ken Giles from the Ag and Biological Engineering Department at UC Davis, and his postdoc Dan Downey, plus other lab members, were very helpful in bringing their professional and technical expertise into the project. Jim Markle and his crew from the Coalition for Urban and Rural Environmental Stewardship were the key drift monitors. Henry Miller Jr. and the folks at John Deere Tractors and Valley Truck and Tractors in Yuba City helped provide us with a virtually brand new John Deere tractor. And Kim and Bob, plus Bill Philpott from Slimline Manufacturing, contributed the initial idea, plus helped make a sprayer available. And the California Dried Plum Board helped fund this project. So here's what we did. In the fall of 2010, I found a grower who let me spray his 30-acre block with 2 unreplicated treatments. We used, it was in a high-pressure area. This was replicated in 2010 in another high-pressure area. Both times we used the equivalent of 3 ounces per acre of the original Warrior pesticide. This is a modest but effective rate for aphid control in the dormant timing. Treatment 1 is the grower standard as recommended by the UC. That is full air settings, PTO RPM at 540, the high gear setting on the fan, and we used D6 and D4 nozzles with 25 cores. I compared that with the Gear Up and Throttle Down approach with the low fan setting on the sprayer and 20% lower engine RPMs. We used, because we're driving faster, we used D12 and D7 with 25 cores There's a hollow cone nozzles. Spray volume was the same between both treatments. We were at 100 gallons per acre. Nozzle location was unchanged. We just swapped out the nozzles at the same locations on the boom. Again, as I said, we repeated this trial on a 40-acre block in November 2010. November 2011. Here's a photo of the sprayer and the tractor in the orchard just prior to spraying in 2010. The same equipment was used in 2011. We used a John Deere 5105 tractor and a Turbomist S30 sprayer with a 600-gallon tank and a diaphragm pump. The Gear Up Throttle Down concept will work with sprayers with positive displacement pumps or centrifugal pumps with adjustable pump speeds. The positive displacement pumps offer the most options for maintaining proper system pressure while throttling down. To set up the sprayer, I used the Slimline calibration software. This is a very complete and flexible program that was really helpful. It's always important to ground check your sprayer calibration, but this program is great, especially with brand new or nearly new nozzles, or when you want to look at a range of nozzle types and number at different ground speeds and spray volumes. When we got to spraying, we measured spray drift, diesel use, that is gallons of diesel per tank, the time needed to spray out a tank, and then the following spring, that is this April and May of 2011, we monitored the orchard for any sign of prune aphid. Now we'll do that again in 2012 in the block we just sprayed. Here's a photo of the spray going out in 2010. Note that most of the spray is targeted into the upper portion of the canopy using a combination of nozzle placement and adjustment of the air exits in the Turbomist. We've limited the amount of material going directly up in the air. The block is laid out east-west, and the prevailing winds are north and south, so you can expect some crosswind whenever you're spraying, or a good chance of it. This block is a good test location to look at the impact of reducing fan speed on spray delivery. We started the experiment with a slight north breeze and ended it with a stronger south breeze. That is the 2010 experiment. It took me 3 or 4 days to get across the whole block based on my schedule and a few other things. Here's the first piece of information, the key information to growers. We found no aphids the following year. More importantly, neither did the grower or his fieldman. True, we didn't leave an untreated check, but in my experience, and I have a fair amount of experience with this, growers who do a poor job of dormant spraying prunes end up spraying for aphid control in season. An untreated section was established in the 2011 treatment just to make sure that we hadn't picked an orchard or a year that didn't have much aphid pressure. We did not redo the drift measurements in 2011 this fall, but we will monitor for aphid in the spring of 2012. Looking at costs and time and diesel, in both years we saved 4 to 5 minutes per acre and 1 to 2 quarts of diesel per acre using the higher ground speed and lower tractor engine speed with the Gear Up and Throttle Down approach. That worked out to be about 25 to 30 minutes less spraying per 600 gallon tank, and about 1.5 to 2.5 gallons of diesel less per 600 gallon tank. So we have, at least as far as we can tell, Gear Up and Throttle Down didn't affect efficacy and improved productivity under the conditions we were testing. But what about off-site protection? We looked very carefully at spray drift in 2010 to answer that question. Here, looking east, is what the orchard and the field to the south of the orchard looked like on the day we monitored for spray drift in November 2010. Early in the day, there was a nice light breeze from the north. This wind speed was acceptable, not so much as to make it an obviously no spray day, but enough to be a good drift test day. Note the light-colored flagging tape moving in the breeze when I took this photo. We measured spray drift to the south of the treated orchard in 2 perpendicular transects per treatment. Drift collectors were set up on the ground at 25, 50, 75, 100, and 200 feet from the last tree row on the south side of the block. We ran the sprayer in the first 6 rows on the south side of the block, cutting the rows in half so we could run the 2 treatments on each side of this, and each portion of 6 rows. On the outside of the orchard, we use only the side of the sprayer facing into the orchard. That would be facing north. We did run both sides of the sprayer in the first full tractor aisle between rows 1 and 2. And then later, after we did this drift work, I sprayed out the remaining tree rows to the north of those 6 rows we used for the drift treatment, or drift test. We set up a weather station to the south of the orchard, out in the open, where we could measure wind direction and speed, temperature, relative humidity, things like that. We didn't measure sustained breezes above 1 to 2 miles an hour throughout the test. There were slight gusts that came up and down, but looking at the average numbers, we did not measure much in the way of wind. By the time we started spraying, actually, the wind was erratic, blowing from varying directions. I thought the drift test was going to be a bust. Drift collectors, thick, high-quality watercolor painting paper and water-sensitive paper, were set up at regular intervals from the spray orchard. There's the water-sensitive paper, and of course you can see the watercolor painting paper. Here are the stations at 25 and 50 feet out from the first row in the orchard. There were also stations at 75, 100, and 200 feet behind where the picture was taken. We did not measure drift at different heights downfield, but measured it on the orchard, or probably on the ground, where it would settle out. Here are the results from the drift measurements. The numbers shown here are micrograms of active ingredient, lambda cyhalothrin, found in Warrior, used in Warrior, collected on the sets, on the 2 8-inch by 11-inch drift cards set in the ground at each location. We saw a large reduction in spray drift, despite the fact that very little wind actually blew on the day we did the trial. At 25 feet, there was about 4 times drift. There was about 4 times the drift measured when the orchard was sprayed with the grower standard compared to the gear up and throttle down treatment. At 100 feet, there was no detectable drift from the gear up throttle down treatment, but measurable drift from the grower standard. Given the low wind speed on the spray day, when the day we put out the treatment, the difference in drift between the 2 treatments probably came from the smaller, more drift-prone droplet sizes and the higher fan speed used in the standard treatment. Using more air in the standard treatment pushed the smaller drops to a greater release height and distance from the sprayer, allowing more drift, allowing whatever wind was there on that day to catch it and move it out. Here's why a crosswind doesn't worry me so much with gear up and throttle down, at least with a decent-sized sprayer in a dormant or near-dormant orchard. On the last day of the experiment, there was a stiff south breeze blowing, less than 10, but somewhere between 6 and 9 miles per hour. I set up water-sensitive paper in the middle of the tractor aisles along a transect inside the orchard running north-south, perpendicular to a row I was planning to spray. Then I sprayed the row, hedging into the wind by driving closer to the upwind trees. Here are the water-sensitive papers from those transects. While there was no difference into the wind, the difference in downwind drift was noticeable with the smaller droplets from the standard nozzles carrying further downwind. There's the transect from the 4 mile an hour gear up and throttle down. And here's the transect from the slower grower standard. On the upwind side, there was no difference in coverage on the orchard floor of the first upwind row between the 2 treatments. The lesser fan airflow in the gear up and throttle down setup appeared to have been balanced by the larger and heavier droplets produced by the bigger nozzles used in the gear up and throttle down setup. The heavier droplets carried further into the wind despite having less sprayer fan air to push them into the wind, and here again is compared with the grower standard at 2.5 miles an hour. There was no difference into the wind. Well, while there was no difference in the wind, the difference in downwind drift was noticeable with the smaller droplets from the standard nozzle carrying further. Again, there's the gear up and throttle down, and there's the grower standard transects. It looked like the gear up and throttle down concept seems to work under the conditions of this test, maintaining pest control while reducing costs, spray time, and drift. Here are those last 5 rows downwind, showing the difference in downwind drift between the 4 mile an hour gear up, throttle down, and the 5 mile an hour up to 2.5 mile an hour standard program. Again, you can see there's quite a bit more drift material accumulating on the water sensitive papers, certainly at 3 and then 4 and even 5 rows over from the sprayer, and there's virtually nothing on the, or very, very little on the gear up and throttle down papers. Is this all too good to be true? I had to ask myself that after the first year data looked so good. I'm repeating the work, or we decided to repeat the work in 2011 just to make sure we didn't miss something in 2010. Will the gear up and throttle down approach work under all conditions in prunes or any other orchard? Probably not, as the canopy becomes more dense after bloom and spray coverage becomes more difficult. But if we get good results from spraying this fall, I'll definitely start talking about this practice to prune growers for fall and dormant spray timings. And that's an important timing to control drift. And every timing is an important one for efficacy and efficient application. I'll suggest that they start slow and do a small block or a single tank to see how this practice works in their orchard with their equipment, but I really do think it's worth a good look. Thanks very much for your attention, and thanks to Slimline Manufacturing for introducing me to Gear Up and Throttle Down.